Good evening, everyone. Hope you can hear me okay. I was looking at one particular scripture that I wanted to focus on today, and in it was the word convert. And the whole purpose of it was to try and figure out what that really meant to be converted. So with that, if I can get down here, there we go. Tonight's agenda. And the scripture is in Matthew 18:3. Shouldn't be a surprise because that's what I sent out to Don to publish. And the word is about convert, turn, repent. And then I want to talk about that in pretty good depth, defining the Greek term, strephos, and then look at it, what the context of Matthew 18:3 is all about, where he had a discussion responding to his disciples. And along with that, as if you read the scripture, it has to do with children. So I'd like to talk a little bit about the characteristics of children that we should have. And then follow up with the question, what does it mean to be converted? And how would you describe your conversion? At the end, I'd like to go through a little group exercise where I'll record all your comments on what it means to be converted. So if you have any questions, let me know, and just shout it out. I don't have anybody's questions showing up here, so if you put your hand up or not. So if you're looking at three different types or three different versions of Matthew 18:3, I found it interesting that they actually use three different words, which is to be converted in the King James, the old King James. It talks about and said, "Verily I say unto you, except you be converted and become as little children, you shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven." And then in the English Standard Version, it says, "And truly I say to you, unless you turn and become like children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." And then finally in the Amplified Version, which is always longer, it says, "And said, truly I say to you, unless you repent, change, turn about, and become like little children, trusting, lowly, loving, forgiving, you can never enter the kingdom of heaven at all." So with that in mind, I looked at Strong's Concordance and also Vine's, and we found out that it's actually used, Strong's number 4762, the Greek, used 19 times, and it's defined as strengthened from the base of Greek, the Strong's Concordance number 5157. It means to twist, turn quite around, or reverse, to convert, to turn, and go in a different direction. Now, the Vine's Expository Dictionary is a lot more expansive. It discusses the terms in both the active and the passive voice. And in the active one, it talked about to turn, to bring back, reflexively, to turn oneself, to turn the back to people, and to turn one thing into another. And what I'd like to do is to read those scriptures a little bit here and find out what it does say. To turn something in Matthew 5:39, where that's used. This is the same Greek word here. It says, "But I say unto you that you resist not evil, but whosoever shall smite thee on thy right cheek, turn to him the other also." So as you can see, it's implying something here. The active voice is to turn around. So in this case, this particular scripture, you actually turn the other cheek. So you're moving away from something and going another direction. The next one was to bring back, and that was in Matthew 27:3. It says, "Then Judas, which had betrayed him, when he saw that he was condemned, repented himself and brought again the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and elders." So what he did was he took that money and he brought it back to those that gave it to him and tried to make amends in that way. Obviously, he didn't, and he committed suicide at the end. The next one, reflexively, to turn oneself, to turn the back to people. And that was said about God in Acts 7:42, where it says, "Then God turned and gave them up to worship the host of heaven, as it is written in the book of the prophets, O you house of Israel, have you offered to me slain beasts and sacrifices by the space of 40 years in the wilderness." So he actually turned away from them because of what they were doing. They were turning from God, and he turned from them. The fourth one there, to turn one thing into another, is to change it, right? So in Revelation 11:6, it says, "These have power to shut the heaven, that it rain not in the days of their prophecy, and have power over waters to turn them to blood, and to smite the earth with all plagues as often as they will." So it was a turning, a changing. So the waters in this case were turned to blood. And as we move on, as you imagine, there's also a passive voice, and there are two examples of that. One is it's used reflexively, in other words, to turn oneself. In Matthew 7:6, it says, "Give not that which is holy unto the dogs, neither cast you your pearls before swine, lest they trample them under their feet and turn again and rend you." So it's basically turning against you, coming after you. John 20, verse 14 and 16. The word is used there in both of those verses. It says, "And when she had thus said, she turned herself back and saw Jesus standing, and knew not that it was Jesus. Jesus says unto her, Mary, and she turned herself and says unto him, Rabboni, which is to say, Master." So in this case, she actually turned, and that was turning of the whole body. And then metaphorical use of it, something that is used to represent something else. And lo and behold, we see Matthew 18:3 used here. And as you might expect, it's used to represent something else, where it says, "Instead, verily I say unto you, except you be converted and become as little children, you shall not enter the kingdom of heaven." So the conversion is something that moved them from where they were as adults to become like little children. And then John 12:40, to wrap up this definition section, it says, "He hath blinded their eyes and hardened their hearts, that they should not see with their eyes, nor understand with their hearts, and be converted, and I should heal them." So in this case, you're talking about how it's a changing of the heart and their mind, their eyes, so that they would actually be saved and be corrected and be brought to salvation there. Any questions so far? Pretty straightforward, I guess. It's all legal. The definitions. Now let's look at the context of Matthew 18:3, and it's actually Christ's response to a question that the disciples had given to him. And the question in the first verse was, "At the same time, they came to Jesus and said, Who's the greatest in the kingdom of heaven?" Now, Christ's answer was pretty far-reaching. In verses 2 through 5, it says, "And Jesus called a little child unto him, and set him in the midst of them." And then this verse says, "And said, Verily I say unto you, except you be converted, and become as little children, you shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven. Whosoever, therefore, shall humble himself as this little child, the same is greatest in the kingdom of heaven. And whoever shall receive one such little child in my name receives me." So the verse 5 there means that you're receiving another little one, right? So you're supposed to be like a little child, in being humble and converted. And you are supposed to be able to receive others who are just like you, like a little child. And we are to receive them in his name. And this is talking about how we should be able to deal with one another, all of us at the same level as little children, being respectful and humble of one another. And the scripture that came to my mind was that it's good for brethren to dwell together in unity. And that's That's what he's talking about here. He's talking about the fellowship that we can have amongst us. Verse 6 and 7, it says, "But whoso shall offend one of these little ones, which believe in me, it were better for him that a millstone were hanged about his neck, and that he were drowned in the depth of the sea. Woe unto the world because of offenses, for it must need be that offenses come, but woe to that man by whom the offense comes." And the thought came to my mind about how offensive it was to hear the governor of New York and to see him proudly smiling as he was signing into a law that now gives the women in New York the ability to kill their children after they're born, as they're being born. And this is really what Christ is speaking about here, how when he told his disciples, "Woe unto the world because of offenses." I was certainly offended, and it just turns your stomach to see what people are doing these days on something. On some levels, on many levels, they're getting very bad. Matthew 18:10, "Take heed that you despise not one of these little ones, for I say unto you that in heaven their angels do always behold the face of my Father which is in heaven." So this is talking about the little ones again, your brethren, your fellow Christians. And the thought came to my mind that we really need to be careful on our dealings with one another, that we are not to despise each other because they might not believe exactly the way we do. And we need to take into account that people are different. They have different understandings. And a lot of it is because of the way they view things from their background, their perspective. And we need to have discussions with people and not have fights. So here I looked up, this came out of I gave you the web link at the bottom of the screen there, 20 positive characteristics of children to consider how we might turn to be more like them. We were children once, right? And that's what it's about, turning back to the good characteristics, the good positive characteristics that children have. And I put a note on there just as a qualifier. As it says, children have some characteristics that God's people are not to copy. Children do not know very much. They lack the ability to focus on one thing for long periods of time. And they are foolish and easily deceived. So we're not to be like, those kind of childish things. Instead, if you look at that list there, humility, contentment, dependability, on and on and on, honesty, courage. And, some things they don't talk about, they got a really good optimistic and positive attitude. It's always fun to see them giggling and playing. Anybody want to talk about anything on that list as I have another sip of coffee? Nope, okay. So that gets us to the discussion question. What does it mean to be converted, and how would you describe your conversion? So I started off here and started to put some of the things down that were from what I've been talking about a little bit earlier. It's the word means turning and repenting. It's really turning back to being as we once were, which was little children. And in 1 Corinthians 14:20, it says, "Brethren, be not children in understanding, albeit in malice be you children. But in understanding, be men." And being humble is another one, not offensive to other Christians. And how we respond to others with the faith that lies in us is another thing. So what I'd like to do is probably talk a little bit about what my conversion was like, and then maybe we can share some of that. Some of you can share your history as well. It's when I first learned about God, it was through my wife, Marlene, and she started handing me pamphlets from the Worldwide Church of God. And she said, if you can disprove any of this, go for it. And I couldn't do that. So as a result, one of the things that I turned to, I was raised as a Lutheran, so I didn't turn back to it, but I turned to, the keeping of the Sabbath and eating the right foods and observing the holy days and all those things. And the nice part about it, we were able to get baptized at the same time. So that's my story. And we'll open up the floor to others who would like to possibly add to our list here. If you can see my screen, I will attempt to put a few additional thoughts in here as I hear them.
All right.
I don't hear anyone. Am I supposed
Well, I'll just jump in here. Mine is long and detailed, but I can sum it up real quick. The main part of my conversion was greed. It sounds funny, but I knew a church person who ran a business. I wanted to get into the same business, and I pretty much followed his example. And he's like, well, why are you closed Friday night and Saturday? And I said, well, it's simple. If your God does it for you, then he has to do it for me. He is bound by his promise. These promises are in this book. He has to do it by his word. So it's a great and good example. It came into the faith. That's a real Cliff Notes version of the whole thing.
That's an interesting perspective.
Well,
Do you have anything you'd like to add about what it means to be converted here on my list?
Well, it means to continue in the example that I was given, keeping the Sabbath, the holy days, striving to do what pleases God. And that's what little children do. They strive to please their parents. They always want to be daddy's favorite, mommy's favorite, and they do things, well, they try to do things to make them happy. So it's the same thing. It's a father-son or father-daughter relationship. You're developing a relationship with your parents.
Anyone else?
I'll be willing to give my testimony a little bit.
Okay.
So my name is Dennis. I spoke a couple weeks ago up here. I'm up in Kansas City with Chris DeWeese's group. So for me, you know, I grew up around Pentecostal churches, and then in my high school years, teenage years, I spent a lot of time in Baptist churches because that's where my friends were. And I learned well. I'm a smart guy, and I think I figure things out most of the time. I've always thought, you know, if I had everything figured out. I think often now that if I was half as smart as I thought I was as a teenager, I'd be the smartest man in the world. But you know, that hubris of thinking you're smarter than everything can come back and bite you. And for me, it did that when it came to gambling. I was gambling as I got into my early 20s to the point that I was gambling away not just my money, but money from my mom. She ran a restaurant in a different state, and she would send me money not knowing I was gambling it away. It turned out that I gambled away her profits and her tax money. I did not know that at the time. Didn't know it until afterwards. But I got to a point where, you know, I'm going to the casinos, and I think I have a system that should work. You know, I've got it mentally figured out. Everything should work exactly the way I've got it planned out, but it doesn't work. You know, and I got to a point where I'm down to my last $20, and so I go into the bathroom and pray. Right? I pray. It says, God, I know what I'm doing isn't really right, but I got to pay my bills. I was way behind on all my bills. Everything was getting ready to be turned off. I was getting ready to be kicked out of my apartment. I was like, I just need enough money to pay my rent so I don't get kicked out. Help me with this last $20, and I will never come back to casino ever again. And I walked out of that restroom, and I walked to the table and lost that $20 in 2 minutes. And then I prayed for real. And, you know, I sat there thinking about how smart I thought I was. But it wasn't just thinking I was smart and everything. It was also looking around at the world and thinking I had things figured out. And I knew I didn't have things figured out. It was really troubling to me. And I sat there thinking about all these things. And I said, I prayed to God for real this time. I mean, truly for real. And I says, I don't understand I know the things I've been doing is wrong, but that doesn't explain why things don't fit, things don't match, things aren't organized correctly. How can I let things just start working? And I'm not even sure, God, if you exist. This is my prayer. It says, but if you do exist, I promise that whatever the truth is, I'll submit to that. You put it before me. You don't exist, and everything that falls before me is just going to be random chaos. But if there's an order or a hierarchy to it, then I'm going to understand that it's real. And and I believe that. And that was my moment of conversion. I didn't know anything else. I mean, I knew what I grew up with, but I was very shallow in my understanding and shallow in my thoughts. But God honored that prayer. He started putting things before me that started off with creation stuff and being able to trust His word, and everything just built from there, and eventually to the Sabbath and all this kind of stuff. But as Don was saying a minute ago about trying to please your parents and creating that relationship to our Heavenly Father, that really comes down to it. Because in the end, it's who is your God, who is your authority, who's that one thing, who is that one entity that you're going to turn to and say, I will submit to you, because we're going to submit to something. And so for me, the conversion was recognizing there's something beyond myself, smarter and better and wiser than me. That I got to recognize where I sit in the world, and it's not the top of the heap. That there's something else. So there we go. There's a lot more to it, but I don't want to be here for 2 hours.
Well, that's great. It's good to hear.
Looks like the Blizzard Ranch may have something to say.
How could you ever guess? Hi, Tom. It's Paul.
Hi, Paul. How you doing?
And everybody else out there in TV land or whichever. Good. Thanks. Yeah, mine wasn't, I can't really say it was conversion. It was basically being brought into the fold, so to speak. Even as a little kid, I mean, I was brought up in Southern Baptist to begin with, and then transmogrified up north from Georgia up into Illinois into the basically mainstream Christian church. And even then, I mean, I went every Sunday and all that stuff, but even remembering back to that time, like, 10 years old, 8 years old, not being comfortable with what they were teaching and questioning, and asked my dad questions, and he said, you should go talk to the Reverend about that. But and so I asked him, and he said, well, kind of hesitated. So here's a whole library of our church over here. Why don't you grab a couple of books and read those? Here I am. I'm like in junior high school. It's like he just basically diverted the question. No, here, read this or this. I'm like, and so I figured if my dad, I can see him basically handing that off to somebody of quote unquote higher authority. And I didn't fault him for it at all. But when you can't get a pastor or a minister or a reverend, whatever you want to call him, to sit down and talk with you, it's like he's kind of had that nervous look on his face. So, I mean, even at that young age, I was not really convinced that this was the true way to go. Never felt comfortable with their holy days as far as Christmas and Easter and all that stuff. It was just, even as a young kid, it never made sense to me why everybody's going out and buying all these presents for each other and not giving anything to Jesus even as a little kid. It's his birthday, quote unquote, again. So anyway, even going through college and stuff, I didn't experiment. I attended different denominations, the traditional Baptists, Southern Baptists, a few Methodists, mostly Christian, one Catholic service, and that was, I knew right off the bat that was not the place to be. But after Lorena and I got married, we agreed that it wasn't going to be an issue as far as our differences in religion, our beliefs. But it did come to that, and several other people on here have heard me discuss this before, but I'm not going to go in length. But essentially, I'm the kind of a person, or there's my mindset, there's really only two basic kind of people in the world. One who's going to give in to authority, and one who's going to push back. And not necessarily, this wasn't necessarily authority, but it was just the whole issue as far as what Lorene was trying to show me and teach me, and my resistance to that because I had been such a free spirit most of my life. And I don't mean that in a bad way, just basically wasn't convinced that any type of organized religion even then was really the best place to be. And I know it still isn't, she says. I had a really strong relationship with God. I could go out and talk to him for hours. Growing up on a farm, I'd go out in the middle of a 200 or 300 acre field and just sit down and have conversations with him. And I was close that way, very close to him. But again, even then, it was an organized religion. After we got married, it was an organizational thing. So, long story short is that I pushed back. She kept pushing. It was just a natural thing for me to do. That was my natural blockheadedness, I should say. And we finally just sat down and said, this has to stop. Just give me some time, all right? Give me time to myself to study this and start reading this in a way that I've never done before. And it's sort of like what Peggy was talking about, the light bulb. Mine was the dimmer switch. And as soon as I started reading this, literally we both agreed this, and that kind of like cleared the air. I started reading more into it, just starting off with the basics and getting more in depth as far as more Old Testament, which I wasn't accustomed to, obviously, from the previous experiences. And slowly that dimmer switch was turned up and that light bulb started glowing brighter and brighter and brighter. And it's still not at full 100 watts, but it's close, coming from like a 2-watt lamp kind of bulb thing. So that's pretty much how I came into it. Not necessarily, like I said, converted, but that's how I became engulfed by God's Spirit, I like to say, because I've learned so much and I've much more to learn, but I am so humbled and pleased and just overwhelmed that the things that I've come to learn, and even just trying to share that with friends or family members. I mean, unfortunately, you get persecuted to a degree, but there are others who are still patient and say that's interesting. And I've talked to a few friends, close to next door neighbor actually, and have changed gently, not forcing to, just kind of planting the seed, as you would say, and helping them to, oh, wow. And they start researching and doing more study themselves too. So that's I wouldn't say in a nutshell, I guess in a watermelon shell, my story with that one. So thank you.
Oh, thank you. Interesting. I could add that one of the things that happened to me when I was in first grade was I grew up in a town where they only had 2 Catholic churches in it. One was German and one was, what was the other one, Marlene? One was German and one was Polish. And of course I was Lutheran, and I was the only Lutheran in the class, and classes in those days were pretty small. We had a discussion on religion, and because of course everybody was curious as to what a Lutheran was like, and we would have some real in-depth conversations in first grade about that sort of thing and how the religions differed between them. And I was fortunate to have a Lutheran minister who actually was very solid on the Bible, and that was our catechism. We read through the whole Bible and studied that. And interesting, he said, he says, you're gonna be a minister someday. That was interesting. He would say such a thing. Of course, I'm not, but do a lot of speaking though.
Yeah.
Well, technically you are, because the Apostle Paul said, at this time we should all be teachers instead of drinking milk. So you're there, my friend. I'm continuing in the same vein of my lovely counterpart.
He is lovely.
Who else is in the room, buddy? I don't know if I'd be like second generation or third generation. Not really sure, because my grandmother. And Paul did miss this part. You didn't talk about your grandma Harold. Okay, he's going to tell you the story.
We'll jump back over. Yeah, I am thoroughly convinced that my grandmother in Georgia probably listened to the Radio Church of God back in the it was probably the late 60s, maybe early 70s. We would go down and visit them after we moved up to Central Illinois, but we lived in Southern Georgia. And she'd be sitting out there on that big front slab of a porch, concrete slab, in her big rocking chair. And she had a Bible the size of I couldn't even tell you, it was probably about a 2 by 3 foot. Just imagining remembering this, but it was a huge lap Bible, literally probably 16 by 24. It was a huge Bible. And she would sit there on the front porch, rocking in a rocking chair with her Bible. And all the aunts and uncles, my mom and dad, and everybody were in the kitchen having coffee or tea or whatever it was. Nothing of the spirits, no. That was medicinal. But we had probably 10 or 12 of us cousins, kids and stuff, all pretty close in the same age range. And, 5-6 years apart of each other. But anyway, she'd be rocking in that rocking chair and she'd be preaching to us kids. And we'd sitting down there, being respectful. We weren't like, let's go play or anything like that. When she would do that, she was authority enough in a quiet way that we'd sit and listen to her. And so she was telling us at this time, of course, it was December. Everybody was down on now it's called winter break, but everybody's out of school for 2 weeks. And so we would go down and spend a nice warm Christmas. And she was preaching to us kids and telling us that it's not really Jesus's birthday in December 25th because of the scripture where the shepherds were tending their flocks in the upper pastures. And that kind of tells you, usually at that time of the year, the climate-wise, that the upper pastures didn't have any feet on them because it was cool or cold enough. They always would have them down closer to their dwellings. And so that means Jesus couldn't have been born in December because there were, that discrepancy. That was one of the simple things that she was getting across from us, and that we shouldn't really be celebrating Christmas in December. And so my older brother, he's about 2 years older than me, I remember him saying, well, if you're not going to celebrate Christmas, so neither am I. And of course, it's warm enough. They have the screens open, and it's a small house. So that was like a rock hitting a hornet's nest. As soon as my parents and everybody else heard her say that, my brother say that, they all came pouring out onto that front porch and said, "You kids get your butts out of here. You go play and do something else." And they were just wagging fingers and yelling at my grandma. And she's sitting up there with her arms folded across her lap, rocking, and this nice little smile, just rocking and taking it up, just bouncing off of her. So I just something I can remember that vividly, being probably in 3rd or 4th grade, that's stuck in my head. And looking back in retrospect, that was a seed that got planted. And obviously I grew up and had my own, not necessarily wild oats, but I did have my own self-absorption. And so in the long run, I did that kind of long roundabout to come to where I am now. So.
See, that was awesome context, buddy.
Your little story made me laugh about your Lutheran minister friend. I got bounced around as a kid we had every faith under the sun in our family. And I was going to church with my parents, Lutheran church, and we got done doing the Bible, the Sunday school, and we were going over Easter. And the scripture was mentioned, the 3 days and 3 nights. And I remember 7 years old walking up to my dad going, "Wait a minute, this don't add up." And I had my fingers up. He said, "Well, go talk to Pastor." And Pastor, I went up and said, "Well, one day, Friday night, Saturday night, that's only 2 nights, 1 day." And he turned to my dad and said, "Perhaps you should let Ruth take him to church." And then told me, "Some things you won't understand until you get older." So I was uninvited from the Lutheran church.
You were 7 years old.
7 years old.
You started young.
Oh, I've been a regular pain since the beginning.
Yeah, he's been tossed out of a number now. So
I wear it as a badge of honor. There must be some other people out there who can add to your list.
Well, I can share if you want.
Yes, please.
Okay. Well, I started out Catholic church, and then once my husband and I got married, we realized we went more to a Christian church. And then what happened is one day somebody invited us to a Bible study. So of course we're in, and they said rip out the page between the New and the Old Testament. That why do that? He goes, because it's all one book, and that just really hit me because it made me realize that all I wanted was the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And that's what I've been searching for ever since. So that's my story.
Thank you.
Okay, so it's Lorraine this time. Little bit different, unless someone else was going to speak. Can you hear us?
Very well, thank you.
Okay. So my grandmother started attending Worldwide first, then my mother, and then my dad needed to prove my mom and my grandmother wrong, and so being, the family had originally started out in Catholicism. I guess over time he did his own study, and we all ended up starting attending Worldwide together. So for me, being 4 or 5 years old, it just, I don't know, didn't really mean anything to me, I guess. Because over time you get tired of hearing that, you're not going to get married, you're not going to go to high school or college or whatever it was.
yep, I wasn't going to graduate high school.
Yeah. But there was always something there, and I don't know how to explain it. My grandmother wanted to make sure, I think I was like 4 or 5 years old, and of course, my younger brothers, they had the blessing of the little children, and okay, I thought that was a little weird, but there was like always this, I don't know how to describe it, like this presence. The other thing, we'd have the Sabbath school every Sabbath, and I'll be the first to admit I was a punk. I was always, yeah, was. Oh, nice. And it's not like I was bucking authority. It was more just hypocrisy. You've got someone teaching you something, and yet you're reading it for yourself, and you're going, well, wait a minute, this doesn't quite jibe. But be that as it may, went to college thinking none of this really mattered, but it still did. There were certain supernatural things that happened while I was in college that have no explanation. Of course, then I met Paul, and
Now
assume
there's
that's
a
not one of them.
supernatural experience.
it is in many ways. Well, I mean, I've told some of these stories, but just things that just don't make sense that happened. And the only thing that can explain it is that God's always been there. And he's just like, all right, you want to explore this, you want to do a little bit of a diversion, but I'll be here when you figure it out. And that's kind of how it's always been. It's kind of like I've gone off in one direction, like, no, that really was a bad decision, and I have always kind of come back. It's been this back and forth, and having, basically, for all intents and purposes, grown up in the faith. It's different being a child in it as opposed to being an adult called into the way, if you will. Just the back and forth has just been like a constant. And finally making the decision to become baptized came down to being asked to teach a Sabbath school class. Did that for a bit, and as I'm reading through, it was very intensive because, of course, like any cook, you've got to test the soup before you serve it. If you catch my drift. And there were just some things that, again, there was a lot of hypocrisy I was finding out. There were some things that I left to others to tell me what they meant, and yet here I'm finding these things, and it just came down to, well, if this is the position that you want me to be in, you want me to teach these kids, these are the things that I'm learning. I needed to make a physical commitment, I guess, for lack of a better. I mean, I already knew that this is where I needed to be, and that Yeshua is my Lord, Master, and my Messiah. It's just kind of like, well, all right, I'm there. Might as well, make the physical. Like when you get married, you get married, you go through the whole physical ceremony and whatnot. So for me, it was a little bit slower than I guess for some folks. So instead of getting hit over the head with the hammer, like some folks, it was more like a slow and long journey. So I guess if you want to know more details, we can share it at the spring feast. There's my plug.
Oh, yeah. That's a good one. Thanks.
If I can add, I don't know if anybody else is going to jump in immediately, but just something, I'm just reading the title of this, so what it means to be converted, and something I just kind of skimming through those real quick. I didn't see anything about what it means to be converted. It means to be more responsible, because you can't just be like mainstream Christian. Well, I converted to this, and you can't just sit back on your heels. You can't just sit back and, I wouldn't say wallow, but you have that warm fuzzy, and that's what a lot of them, they kind of burrow in. They feel really comfortable and warm and happy and stuff, but they're stale. They're not doing the things. They're not going and planting seeds, not necessarily doing the works. But you can't just sit back and be complacent. You have to be able to be responsible for taking God's word and living it, not just speaking it. You have to be an example to people, and that takes a lot of work, a lot of responsibility as far as coming out of a shell if you're a shy or an introvert. Not saying that you have to do that, but I just think that it's the responsibility of it is an important thing.
No, it's perfect. I mean, no, that was great.
Continue.
Paul. Well, part of asking to be baptized is saying, hey, I'm taking responsibility for the decisions I've made, the choice that, basically the life that I have now is a result of the choices I've made, consequences, etc., etc. Yeah, that's awesome. That was good.
I like that. You got to take responsibility for your own actions.
Right,
There you go.
and the commitment to become baptized is like the public acknowledgement that I've taken responsibility for myself, for my past, as well as the future, and the relationship that I choose to have with my Messiah, God the Father, and my fellow travelers in the journey.
I'm just making an assumption. I'm guessing that's where the expression "take the plunge" comes in. The
Oh,
baptism.
yeah. Never thought of that.
Yeah, I like that.
One thing that just popped into my head too just now is that little children, they want to be like their parents. You know, daddy does this, I want to do that. So the father is the creator. So what do? We build things, we create things, you know. It's from our father. We want to strive to be like our parents.
Yeah, Tom and I were, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hello? Okay. Tom and I were talking earlier too about, you know, how, what children act like and, you know, the innocence and the, just the love of life and things are great. And that's what it was like for me when God was calling and giving me understanding. There would be these little spurts of understanding. I was in high school when he started showing me about clean and unclean food. And I just remember being so excited to see that and to understand that. Didn't do anything with it, went off to college. And then started, I remember deciding I was not going to eat pork anymore. And I had my last piece at the college at dinner. And that was the last time I ate pork. And just making those little decisions, but it was always so exciting to start to see things and then learn about Christmas. And Tom and I were dating. We started dating in high school, and we went off to different colleges and kept dating. And so when I was getting more serious about this, and Tom and I decided not to keep Christmas, just between us, we didn't exchange gifts, so we didn't do it. We still did things with our family at that point. But there was these little starting to see things, then you're learning about the Sabbath, and it was just exciting and fun. And you see that with children when they're learning something new and they're just so excited and they're happy about it. And that's part of the childlike thing I relate to.
Marlene, I agree with that. It's like an adventure. The deeper you get in, childlike characteristic. It's like an adventure, looking for more.
So can we talk a little bit more about how children are like this, so we kind of focus back on what the childlike characteristics are? Any words of wisdom on that?
Not ever having kids, I don't have a real good focus on that.
Yeah, but you've seen children. We all have. Yeah, Marlene said, think of puppies.
I think when you're around children, it just brings a smile to your face. They just have an innocence, they have a love for life, and they just, the joy just seems to engulf them, and you just become part of them. I just really appreciate that about children.
Yeah, I understand.
I agree. They just have a love for life and they're happy and they laugh about nothing. You can do anything and it's just hilarious to them. And also I learned when I have been subbing and they have like first graders, something is bothering them. You know, little Johnny said something to them they didn't like or did something, and they come up and tell me about it, and I'll call the other student over and I'll explain, well, so-and-so said you did this. And They'll talk it out, and then they forgive, and they're best friends again. So easily forgive and forget, and just go on with life, and life is
Well, also coming from a background from education and worked with special needs kids, it's so rewarding. But the childlike attitude, yes, the childlike attitude that they have, that teaching them. I was an itinerant physical education teacher, adapted PE. Am I muted now? Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, we hear you.
Okay. Anyway, sorry, we're looking at the screen. We saw a little thing pop up. But anyway, just working with them and teaching them different skills. And usually they would get shuttled into the corner of the gymnasium during PE class or something. So I would come in and, they'd have a special class period set apart or set aside so that we could go and do something, and teaching them different skills and introducing new types of games and things for adapted so that all of them could participate, and or just teaching them something new. And they finally had that little bit of a success. They finally got it, and they started doing it. That they would smile and turn and look at you, and their eyes were just glimmering. They were just that experience that they learned something new, and it was like an epiphany, or the whole world just opened up to them because they've got this new accomplishment. They realized and comprehended this entire thing, the explanations and the physical attributes that go along with it. And that's kind of like, I think, what goes back to the scripture. We need to be more like that too, or not necessarily more like it, but don't forget that, because we were there once ourselves. I remember learning something from my dad, like, cool, it's like, all right, and you get that joy, that just overwhelming sense of just awe that your dad being able, or your mom, or whoever being able to teach you this. And then you take it and you go and learn it. And then, years and years later, obviously, for a skill that you developed, and you teach somebody else that skill. And then when it clicks with them, it's that same experience all over again. It's something as a coach, or that I was blessed to be able to do, to share my talents that way and to help others improve themselves, and just watch that look, that like I said, that light bulb going on, and just the incredible rush, humble, but that incredible rush that you get from seeing them learn that and improving themselves that way. So that's something we need to, I think, remember, no matter what it is, just be able to do that and remember that and hang on to that.
It's interesting, Paul, that you mentioned that. It brings a memory back to my mind. I grew up on a farm, and my dad taught me how to run the machinery and to work that. And he had me take the baler back home along the fence line. And the fence line was on the right-hand side, and that's the side that the baler sticks out on. And if you make a left turn sharp with a baler, it kicks the baler off to the right. So as I was driving along, I had to pull over fast to the left, and I took out about 3 fence posts of the fence. I remember my father just standing there and laughing. He was just laughing. It's the first time. Normally he got mad about things, but in this case he just laughed. I understood that I learned a lesson. And he was quite pleased about that. And then he made me fix the fence.
So we're talking about coaching. Kind of brought this back to mind, and it's something that I thought about a lot when my son was younger. I coached basketball when my son was 5, 6, 7 years old, and I had this rule at the time that every child at some point during the season would score a basket, because when they scored a basket in a game, during a game, not during practice, but in a game, they became so excited and wanted to do more and more and more. So that little bit of success was like a driving force for them. They had that little bit of success. They just wanted to become more into it, and then they would dive into it head first, and then to give everything they had. And I think about that in our congregation, our assembly, that we want to look for ways to give kids that early success so that they will dive into it. And I think that's part of what we're talking about here with being childlike, is that we look for that early success, and then when you have it, take advantage of it and to dive into the Word and dive into your relationship with God to try to get as much out of it as possible.
I think another characteristic of a child is they have no worries. They don't worry about where the food's going to come. They just know it's going to be there. They know that you know, they're going to have toys, or mom's going to be there, dad's going to be there. They just are totally reliant on God, and they don't have no worries.
Is that another description of faith, perhaps? I'd like to add, and maybe this isn't a childlike aspect, but maybe a sign of conversion is being able to put yourself in the place of God. And I don't mean in a bad way. It's without going into too much detail. Paul and I are going through some trials with a family member, and the issue is that this person feels entitled to have us help them financially, you name it, whatever it might be. And yes, we may have that ability, but we know that giving them their heart's desire would completely destroy them or enable them to continue in a path of destruction. And so it's funny, we were talking about this not more than maybe a couple hours ago, that could you imagine being the creator of the universe, having the power to give the heart's desire to your child, anything they wanted, like a whole Bruce Almighty type situation, but knowing that that would be the worst thing you could possibly do to them, because it would A, stunt their growth, and B, completely turn them in a direction that was unhealthy. So yeah, that was a lesson we learned today, because we felt guilty that we weren't helping this person, but at the same time we knew that if we gave them what they wanted, it would not be the right thing.
That makes sense.
This is Mike.
Mike.
I all this talk about children, it kind of cued me to what I can add, I guess. I think I had a somewhat different childhood, which might be well described as being like fingernails on a chalkboard type experience, and much more negative with the words that were sowed into my life and the negativity. And so by the time I came to the point of going to college, my big question is, well, why would I even want to be alive one more day, much less for eternity? And so that was the question I went off to Ambassador College with. And I have to say that when I arrived there were actually nice people that said nice words, and were good to me for, just for the fact of being good to me. And so that's where I can say, well, the conversion part was to go from the negative, to the path of joy, and which of course that's in the word, but well, how do I know for sure? So I had to go through the process of realizing, well, I believe there is a God, and it's definitely not me. So I just had to start out in faith, and so between the people being good to me at college, and just stepping out on faith and trying to do what God said to do, because if I didn't really give it a fair shake, well, then I'm not really, giving an opportunity for God to transform me. So it's that's a little more my story, is coming from the dark negative path to try to be encouraging and focus, as the Apostle Paul said, and some of my favorite verses in Philippians chapter 4 is to focus on those good things and to be transformed and to have that peace that passes all understanding, and that joy that just doesn't make sense, in the conditions in the world.
So the note I put down there, I don't know if you can see it, Mike, is that if child experiences are not good or joyful, it's more difficult to understand the intent of what Jesus was teaching the disciples. Is that a true statement from your experience? It's the lower right-hand side.
Well, yeah, because I know there's a lot of children with real chronic depression, especially in this society, and there's a lot of children with very negative parental experiences. There's kids that are abused quite heavily. I correspond with a couple of brothers that they're just always get given verbal abuse. They're 20 years old and just they continue to relate. So I try to sow good words and encouragement to them. So I think this is a thing in the world, just a very negative experience with life, and that's a good point to be converted from.
And that's, that goes back to the scripture you read about, where it said that there are, woe to those that in the world that are experiencing these offenses or commit these offenses. These are offenses against people.
Right.
Not right.
Yeah.
I would have to say your statement is right. I've met a number of people that had abusive parents and fathers who either sexually or emotionally assaulted them. And they have a very hard time with the concept of God the Father and looking to him for trust, because they don't understand what a father is, and what a father is supposed to do. Their experience with a father is just very, very negative. And on that note, Sheila typed in the chat room, another characteristic is childlike trust that a young one has in a parent in a healthy family environment.
Yeah, that's very true. I'm not picking on any particular organization, but growing up in that worldwide Church of God and having a list put on the refrigerator for how many times you'd be smacked on your bottom for a particular offense and all sorts of other nonsense, coupled with a dysfunctional family, you're absolutely right, Peggy. It made it very hard to establish a relationship with God the Father. Through the grace of God and having experienced a wonderful relationship with my father-in-law, it really showed how God intends a relationship to be. I mean, that's why he created the family unit to begin with, to create an emulation of his intent so that we could experience in the physical what his intent was for the spiritual. But I'm speaking the obvious.
I think another characteristic of a child is that they're non-judgmental. It doesn't matter if they have a child that they want to play with. They don't care if they're black, white, Hispanic, whatever. Their color doesn't make a difference. It's about the relationship and the joy of discovering what that other person has. So I see that characteristic of no anti-Semitism, if you want to say it from an adult point of view. It doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if their hands are black or if their hand is white.
That's very true. One other thing I've learned in the last couple of years or so is that there are differing levels of fear. So as adults, there's all sorts of haze and mainstream media nonsense out there that is trying to create a level of fear and stress that doesn't need to be there. And children have very simple fears. And for the most part, if they have a very strong relationship with their parents and trust, that kind of stuff is not there. You know what I mean? And just all sorts of nonsense and junk that we're being bombarded with through the media. Oh, this happened, and okay, now you've got to be fearful, and oh, this is going to happen. And kids don't have that kind of stuff. It's as simple as, oh, it's a thunderstorm, or hey, it's dark, or maybe not even that. If a kid's really well adjusted.
I agree with you, but I want to add something. They also have, they don't need the complex answers. It's a thunderstorm. Oh, that explains it. Simple as that. They are able to just accept an answer and not have to be looking for more.
Hey, Tom, this is Paul again, real quick. Something else, not to say it all, but it looks like it's not that easy once you become converted. Is look at all the stuff we've got up there, all these attributes you have to absorb and process. One thing that I recognize is not being there right now is it goes hand in hand with the innocence and trust of a child. Is the naivete? Is that the word? How you pronounce it? You also have to be able to. I mean, again, Lorraine and I aren't parents, but I always half joked that when I was coaching, it was anywhere between 75 and 150 girls, high school girls, every season that I was working with. So it's like, okay, I got experience, but you need to coach them, and I'm using that in quotations, or the children that you're associated with, your own children, or the ones that you have the influence as far as teaching or whatever. You also have to teach them or impart the thought of not so naive to certain things, because people will take advantage of that. Even, being meek as serpents. Exactly. That's what I was going to bring up. Meek as doves and wise as serpents. We share that in common as far as growing up on a farm. I had very, very healthy relationships with my parents. So I always had the typical sibling rivalry, the wrestling matches, and there was always the pecking order as far as oldest to youngest, the four of us. So getting used to that, but going out into the world, so to speak, after I was successful in high school as an athlete, and in college and even after college, I had the opportunity to go out above and beyond in the track and field realm. And going out to the Mecca, quote unquote, of the track and field area, and was in the Bay Area of San Francisco. the weather conditions, the everything it was a typical year-round place for track and field athletes to go and train. And I had the opportunity to train for the Olympics in '88. So I moved out there literally. I can still see that my dad's expression when I was packing the car, tuning the car up, get up ready for the road trip, a cross country road trip. And when I dropped that bomb on him, I said, yeah, I'm going to be moving to California and go train for the Olympics. I got invited to this, blah, blah. And he says, oh, yeah, so when are you thinking about going? I said, next week. He was like, you can almost hear the clank of his jaw hitting the floor, you know. But going out in from that type of a lifestyle and the rural community, very conservative, very just relaxed and stuff, jumping in at 80 miles an hour into the San Francisco, San Jose Bay Area, the entire lifestyle, as we know, is completely different. And I'll just leave it at that. Lifestyles, I guess, plural. Anyway, but it's like the little adage, fool me once, shame on you, fool me twice, shame on me. Well, it happened more than twice, and I felt, okay, I got to learn from this, because people are really trying to take advantage of me, and a couple of times they did. Not in any really bad way, but basically for their own personal gain. And so you got to learn really quick, if you haven't had that exposure, that's, okay, you can still be humble, you can still be meek, you can still be this trusting person, innocent person, but you got to have that little radar detector, so to speak, out there to be able to discern the difference in what they're you got to be able to step 2 or 3 steps ahead, like Lorene likes to use the chess game expression. You got to be able to plan out your moves 3 or 4 moves in advance before you actually do something, so that you can change that if somebody else brings something else on you, and be able to change that up. So you have to be flexible and be able to thinking way ahead of that. So I mean, the naivete is cute as a kid. They're naive, they're innocent, but there comes a point where they need to have that education or that coaching exposure to it to prepare them that, hey, if you don't look out for this is more than likely going to happen, and you're going to suffer from it. So.
We have a comment in the chat room again from Sheila, and she says that brings up another. Children are inquisitive, but why? Why? How come?
That's actually good, and I can give you the adult version of that. It's called the fudge rule. So when there is some sort of mainstream media hype, give it about 24 to 48 hours. Because why? Where did this come from? And over time, the truth will reveal itself. I can tell you from personal experience that when some sort of nonsense is, released and, oh, hey, it's an exclusive, blah, 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 Trump did this or who did that, don't care. I watch puppy and kitty videos, and about 24 to 48 hours later, the truth actually comes out. So, yeah, wait for it. Don't give in to instant gratification, number one, because kids, you got to teach them to not give in or not desire instant gratification. And the other is, keep asking why, but be patient. Truth will be revealed.
My experience growing up was having a father that believed in why and how come. He didn't just take what the minister had to say. He was constantly questioning why this, how does this work, constantly questioning. And the worst thing we could say when he brought up one of his topics, which he beat to death, was, I don't care. He hated that. It's like, have an opinion, he wanted us to be inquisitive. He wanted us to ferret out the truth. He wanted us to question what the minister said and prove it, that kind of thing. But of course, my favorite word, and the way I used to irritate my sister to death was I would ask her why. And she was old. I'm the youngest, so spoiled rotten and all that. And she would say, go do this. And I go, why? And she'd give me an answer. And I go, why? And she'd give me another answer. And then I'd go, why? And it would drive her crazy because you could say why for every answer she would give. She's the person that is very rules follower, very structured and follows the rules. And I'm the flighty, scatterbrained one. So I just drove her nuts just by asking her why. So I would say I'm a why person.
We're starting to get some pretty small text. Okay, can people still read that?
Barely.
Yeah, barely is a good word.
I wonder if another characteristic would be of a child seems to, once they've learned something, they're always looking at building something else or looking for something new. I think of my son, he wasn't happy with the regular hamburger. He had to put potato chips on the hamburger because it had to add crunch. So they're always looking at building and adding and evolving and creating something of their own.
Yep. Marlene added, that's godlike. God-like. God is a creator.
The worst thing you can tell me is we do this because it's a tradition. That's the first thing I'm going to do is go, why are you doing it as a tradition? And how can we do it differently and better? I love to improve, build a better mousetrap.
Well, I do enjoy traditions.
I just think
Well,
I'm sorry, go ahead, Tom.
I was just saying the holy days are tradition.
But keeping the holy days, do you keep them? Do you have traditions to keep them? And do you do something? There's that story about the woman who's teaching, and the daughter grew up watching her mother cut the end off the, she takes a pot roast, she cuts the end off, puts it in the pot, and then cooks the pot roast. So when the daughter starts cooking for her family, she cut the end off and all that. And one day she asked her mother, why do you always cut the end off of the pot roast? And her mother said, well, because it doesn't fit in the pan unless I do that. And so doing something just because it's a tradition just doesn't work for me.
Well, I'm going to add a little bit because I do like both ideas of tradition and both the whys, but I think of the traditions when it comes to the holy days, but yet in the Word, Yahweh only gives guidelines, and He allows us to create and make each feast a joy of how it goes through. I think about one year when we were doing Passover, we decided to do a cloud and smoke, and it was like, how are we going to do it? Oh, that's simple, Mom. We're going to the fabric store, and we're going to get a fabric that has clouds on it and a fabric that has fire on it, and then we're going to put them, here and there. Or the same idea of we're going to just bring golf balls and hang them up on top and pull a string for when the hail comes down, and we're going to have golf balls falling on top of them. It's all those special, unique creative ways that they can bring things to a higher joy level for them, a higher intimacy with the Father? Just a thought.
Mhm.
Tom, I like to think now, just this realization, just in the last few minutes, that how godly my mother really was. Because whenever she'd tell us to do something, we asked why. She said, "Because I said so." That's authoritative. That's godly. And I really can't think of many, if any, instances in Scripture where God said, "Thou shalt," whatever, like, and nobody ever said why. They didn't question because that authority was there. So, not saying that you bow to authority, but you have to know the rules of the house, so to speak, and don't question so much.
Rules are different than tradition. Well, Dennis,
Well, oh, go ahead, Peggy.
we
Sorry.
have a chat room. Dennis Pilkington, I'm sorry, I'm killing his name. It's not just tradition, it's blindly following a tradition. Know why what we do, like she said earlier. Why?
Well, and that cutting the ends of the pot roast is a perfect example, because, hey, I got to make it fit the pot. If you don't know the root of the tradition, then why are you doing it? And there isn't anything wrong as long as it supports the intent, if that makes sense. We have all these different, like an example would be songs. We have all these different songs that may support the feast or whatever it might be. But as long as they are more of a support role instead of the primary role, then there shouldn't be an issue.
Right. If a tradition makes sense, it's good for me. That's fine. It's just I don't like blindly following tradition.
Right. If it's an educational ladder instead of a crutch or an idol, then it should be fine. The thing that we find is, in some cases, the tradition becomes the purpose rather than the intent, if that makes sense.
Does to me.
Well, we've gone 90 minutes. Maybe we can wrap this up.
Whatever you want to do.